Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. With us about to go over the crest of vanilla and head to World of Warcraft's first expansion, it got me thinking to how far exactly will this journey take us? And I'm often asked, would you look forward to Wrath? Would you play Cata? What about Mop? What about even further beyond that? Which was your favourite expansion? What are you looking forwards to playing again potentially one day? What expansion did you like best? And whilst there are goods and bads from pretty much every expansion that can be taken away, one of them stands out in particular to me, and it stands out for very different reasons than other expansions do. This was an expansion I played from the start to the end, an expansion where I don't think I played this much since Wrath of the Lich King. And I'm talking about Legion. Legion was unexpectedly good, I would say, coming off the back of Warlords of Draenor, which hadn't exactly done much for player expectation. WoD was seemingly abandoned about halfway through as the whole thing was just thrown into a fire, and Blizzard frantically went on to trying to build the next world for us to visit, which was an unfortunate fate for WoD, which had some great content. It was just extremely loosely interspersed throughout the duration of the expansion. I mean, you had a major content patch where they reworked the Blood Elf models. That's the kind of thing we're dealing with, as well as not having the Horde and Alliance capitals where they should have been, no Farallon. I mean, the list of cancelled things just goes on and on for WoD. But luckily, all that developer time was pushed forward into the next thing we were going to be getting. And when Legion came around, it was a big surprise, but it didn't get off to the best start. The artifact grind was really restrictive to forcing you into playing one specialization. There was no good way to swap very easily. Legendary RNG early on. I remember the world first raiders leveling up several of the same class to try and fish for the Abyss Legendary, only to be disappointed by the difficulty of the Emerald Nightmare. I even remember when some people started to receive duplicate legendaries way on down the line in the expansion, that some characters were literally not eligible to receive the Abyss Legendary. But coming off the back of Warlords of Draenor, it expanded the endgame enormously. There was so much repeatable content. Add your reputations, your world quests, your emissaries, Mythic Plus, farming AP for that next big weapon upgrade, your hidden artifact appearances, the Soromar storyline, the mission tables, upgrading your order hall, and later on the Broken Shore, the class mounts, the Mage Tower. The list quite literally goes on and on and on. And looking back to it now and thinking, would I like to go through that experience and play that again? I feel the formula that made Legion so great has started to wear kind of thin in World of Warcraft. Maybe I'm happy with the memories I had of it then, but I wouldn't like to revisit. Perhaps I'd feel different given a few more years though. But imagine if our min-max culture went into it now, grinding more of souls all day, doing endless dailies for artifact power? No thanks, not again. It's not just down to the expansion features either, it's how we as players gained power at that point in time as well. I'm a firm believer in my tinfoil theory that WoW so far has had 3 seasons, which can be very clearly divided up. Season 1, which is the classic era of the game, Vanilla, the Burning Crusade, and Wrath of the Lich King. This era was hallmarked by getting new abilities as we leveled up and entered the new expansion, RPG aspects still existing in the game such as soul shards, hunters having pet happiness and needing arrows. We had enormous talent trees with 1 point gained per level. Season 2 of World of Warcraft is what I call the progressive era of the game, which were Cataclysm, Mists of Pandaria, and Warlords of Draenor. A huge culling of talents to try and squish everything down as they started to get a bit out of control, trying new variations on talent trees, such as Cata forcing you to spend maximum talent points before you could expand into another tree. Mists of Pandaria changed that again, having 1 point per 15 levels and only 1 talent tree, but talents that changed when you changed spec, and Warlords of Draenor had much of the same but a different talent tree for each spec instead. There was a big push towards focusing on the endgame much more so than the leveling process, which was incredibly streamlined, especially by the point of Warlords of Draenor, where the zones were designed with the idea in mind that you would not see all the zones your first time to level cap, so you'd be able to experience something different when you're on an alt. It also had a big push on things like treasures and bonus objectives where you could just level incredibly quickly by the end of the expansion. And the final thing about the progressive season of WoW was the push on collection as a form of real meta endgame content, hallmarked by content like the Isle of Thunder and especially the Timeless Isle, which in itself has become a phrase that we just understand as a player base now. Much like having a patchwork fight, each content patch in a new expansion just seems to have a Timeless Isle zone. And we have the 3rd season of World of Warcraft. This is the temporary power phase, and this is where we are at the moment, which is of course Legion, Battle for Azeroth, and our current expansion, Shadowlands. Power gained throughout the expansion is now temporary. Our classes are like the template, and the expansion adds the flavor and the depth that goes into that. But don't get too attached to it, because you shouldn't expect to be having many of those cool toys which you accumulate throughout the expansion once it has ended. There's been a further notable shift towards endgame content, and especially repeatable endgame content, as the leveling phase has been increasingly squished. Though I will say I do really like what they did with Shadowlands, where you can pick any expansion to level through and then be into the current expansion once you're done with that. I think that was a great change and long overdue at this point in time. So then we've had 3 seasons of World of Warcraft, 3 expansions each. Is it time for season 4 following Shadowlands? I rather anticipated a return to the more classic roots of the game, actually, seeing when Shadowlands was back during its beta phases. They were bringing things back like auras, totems, poisons, as well as squishing our level back down to 60. I thought Classic was going to have some kind of bearing on the direction Blizzard would look to take the expansion, but that doesn't look like it's been the case after all, seeing where we are at the moment. With 9.1 closing in, and our anticipated second fight with a second ex-war chief who's now turned into main antagonist, I'm sure they're going to start looking at switching things up, just how it's been in Legion and just how it was in BFA. Because that is the format that the game follows now. It is how temporary power has always worked out in the end. We have the 0.1 patch, and then we'll have the 0.2 patch, where we'll get some kind of upgrade or new framework to our temporary power ecosystem. And then in 0.3, what they'll do is they'll put it all on vendors, remove restrictions, or just make it generally very easy to get for alts. And all these temporary powers will work up to 10.0, at which point, you know what happens, we take all of them and we throw them in the bin. We take that nice wheel we've managed to construct during the expansion, and it started to work quite well, and we turn it back into a square again. When this happens, it should not come as a surprise, and it's not even getting to be a tinfoil hat theory at this point in time that Blizzard is incompetent or they don't anticipate these problems. They just appear to be the way they are designing the game these days, because hey, I guess it's very good for player retention, and it makes them look good to the shareholders. I really hope whatever we get next breaks up the formula, because it feels like there's a time for change that we need to see. I want the game to regress to a certain degree, back to a time when temporary power was your tier set, where you could create a BIS list and have a realistic opportunity to actually gain all the items on them. Back to a time when there was a clear divide between PvE and PvP gear, and you didn't feel obliged to do one area of content you weren't really invested in to excel in the other, where your character's power was mostly tied to your abilities and your talents, and where we had a bit more variety in stats, and every single piece of gear wasn't tailored to be uniform between all specializations if needs be. Not to try and make the game back into Classic, it's good to have a difference between the two versions of them. Retail is so much more fast-paced and flashy, the top-end content is vastly more difficult than anything you'll find in Classic, and the content aims to appeal to a wide variety of players as well through having different difficulties. Whilst Classic is much more slower paced, I think it's simpler to understand and generally more of a social game should you seek those kind of interactions out. And there's no pressure or feeling that you're losing out because you haven't ticked off your daily or weekly chores to keep your character up to scratch. I know Shadowlands has a lot left to offer at this point, but when I think about expansions I'd want to play and how much I liked Legion back in the day, I've come to realize a lot of the things which I liked in Legion back then are reasons why I don't like Shadowlands as much now. The necessity to tick off the daily and weekly tasks, grinding currencies for your latest temporary power system, knowing I'm going to lose all the cool stuff which I've got during the expansion at the end of it, and that even in some cases Blizzard tried to replace those, such as with talents, they've always felt very watered down and just weak in comparison to how they felt during the expansion. That's the thing about World of Warcraft expansions though, each time a new one comes around it's, I hope, they've learned, things will be different. Man, the art team sure has made this place look great for the 200th time in a row. But I do really hope that this is the turning point when things do start to change, because looking back at World of Warcraft, I think it's time for Season 4. So let me know your thoughts on all the different versions, which ones you'd like to play again, and so on and so forth. What you thought about Legion, whether you liked it at the time or whether you just hated it straight away. And maybe even what you think our big 10.0 patch will look like. At least for the time being, Blizzard still has TBC and Wrath of the Lich King to lean on, so they're good for at least about an expansion and a half on the retail side of things. But beyond that, we have Ashes of Creation and whatever Riot is working on at the moment. It should be a few, fingers crossed, interesting years for the MMO players. I sincerely hope we get some competition, because we definitely need some excellence at the moment. That's about it though, guys. Thank you so much for watching and listening in. See you all in the next one very soon.